our first meeting in Boston in 2009, and out of that roughly 24 attendees, many of them were terrified at that time to even be seen talking about reforming sex offender laws. They did have some reason to be fearful. As anyone in this movement learns pretty quickly, Americans have a love-hate relationship with sex. We flaunt, we glorify it on the media, and then we turn around and punish people when they act on what they see. And since in the public's mind, someone on a public sex offender registry must be dangerous, anyone who advocates for changing those laws is of questionable character as well. At the time of our first conference, Reform Sex Offender Laws was little more than a website with a statement that people could sign. We were seeking to inspire dialogue among professionals and other citizens regarding the reform of sex laws in America. And RSOL was among only a handful of organizations who were taking a public stance that the sex offense laws in America were too broadly applied, the consequences were often too harsh, civil commitment was being overused and abused, and of course that public registries were ineffective, costly, and shameful. Let's fast forward to this year. For the first time, we've pushed ourselves outside of our safety envelope, and we've truly promoted this year's conference. And as Lloyd mentioned, we've certainly garnered our share of media attention, and this was assisted in no small part by our online enemies. In fact, they did, ooh, wow, I can hear myself. They did their level best to discredit RSOL and to get this conference canceled. But they have failed. Now, why, you might ask, has that happened? Because we have nothing to hide. No matter what names we get called or what threats get thrown at us, every person in this movement needs to know that we all share the same positive vision for future change. We want sex offense laws that are based on equal justice and respect for the dignity of all people. We want protection from and reversal of retroactively applied restrictions that are resulting from public registration. And we want viable, effective policies that will protect our communities. I believe that everyone here can agree to that vision. In a nutshell, that's why we're all here this weekend. And it also represents RSOL's vision, a vision we just adopted a short time ago. RSOL's gone through its share of growing pains over the years. A small group of idealists with a website can discuss and can make plans behind closed doors. But true activists cannot do that. At last year's conference, RSOL's admin team sat before you, and we promised more transparency, more accountability, and more support for our affiliates. We've had plenty of bumps and hiccups, but we are well on our way this year. RSOL is now incorporated. We have a working set of bylaws, and we've made it through our first electoral process. From here onward, 9 admin team members will be serving alternating 3-year terms. Each year, our affiliates will select 2 via an electoral process, and 1 member will be selected by the existing admin team. At the end of each term, a team member has to go through that same process again if they wish to continue. We're also more transparent. Meetings of our admin team are now open, and they are announced to our affiliates. Anyone can pose questions and suggest agenda items to the team members, and our agendas and meeting summaries are distributed promptly to all of our organizers. All of our admin team members have biographies on our website. And our Contact Us page gives you multiple ways to reach the admin team or any of our various standing committees. One area that we want to develop during the coming year is that of financial growth and transparency. As an incorporated organization, we have to take more responsibility for the money that we receive, and toward that end, I'm hoping soon to be publishing at least quarterly financial statements showing all our income and outflows of funds. And another thing that I'm hoping we'll be establishing over the coming year is a recurring revenue stream of some sort. One possibility might be through annual memberships at, just for an example, say $20 a year. Recurring revenue is essential if RSOL is going to sustain the projects that we already have in place, such as our prison project and our media team, also known as the Correspondence Committee. We want to continue growing our legal fund, and a longer-term goal would be to start doing some lobbying and collaborating at a national level. These are just dreams right now, but they can become a reality with a recurring revenue. The media attention that has occupied us this year occupied at least 3 of us, and I think more, for easily 8 to 10 hours a day for several days in a row. Now, there are very few volunteers out there who are crazy enough, insane, dare I say, to give up all their discretionary time like that. Wouldn't it be great if we could pay a qualified person to tackle some of these jobs? No matter how priceless each and every volunteer is, and believe me, a good, reliable volunteer is totally priceless. Everything we do still comes with a price tag. Now, where the fund's going to come from, I have no surefire, easy answer to that. So, RSOL's first step is going to be to establish a finance committee and charge it with the task of researching and launching a financial plan to include creating that steady revenue stream. If anyone among you is interested in serving on that committee, be sure to let me know. We're still developing ways to support our state affiliates. During the coming year, I'm hoping to launch regional teleconferences for state leaders so that the neighboring states can network, help each other with local concerns, and think up new and creative ways to keep the admin team on their toes. We'll also be launching a new 3-phase training process over the coming year for new affiliate organizers. You can get a taste of that at the panel later this morning that'll be moderated by our affiliate coordinator, Jennifer Van Wees. One more way that I hope we can help our affiliates is that we are developing a brief, clear message, a set of beliefs or assertions, if you will, that our activists can use in their work. It's my belief that these will become the core of RSOL's message, the undeniable, critical facts that the rest of America needs to know. They're still being developed by our planning committee, but I wanted to share the working list with you at least right now so you can see where we're headed. RSOL believes public registries have exceeded their original intent of tracking the most heinous of offenders. Public registries provide no measurable improvement to public safety. Public registries endanger the very people that they claim to protect. Retroactively applied public registration and registrant restrictions, which are extended beyond an individual's sentence, are unconstitutional. Proximity restrictions, especially residency restrictions, also violate a citizen's constitutional rights. Choosing to set apart any group of people and deny them civil, constitutional, and human rights threatens the rights of every person in the nation. For most advocates, these statements, as you can tell by the applause, may seem like preaching to the choir. But these statements are not intended for the choir. They're our rallying cry, the flag that we must be waving to everyone else out there at every opportunity. I think the most exciting recent accomplishment for RSOL has been the creation of the new vision statement and the mission statement to guide our decisions and to help us to set clear goals. I already introduced our vision to you at the beginning of my talk, and just FYI, a vision statement is a picture of the world as we would like it to be. It's big. It's maybe even impossible, but it's that ideal. A mission statement is more of a set of actions that stem from that grand vision. And it's more concrete, but a mission is still very broad and very far-reaching in scope. Most, but not all of these mission statements have been ratified by the admin team, but they're still a little bit under development. This is the action. Yes, and it is, Lloyd's waving this in the air. You'll find that in your folder, in your packet of materials. Most of these are in there. RSOL advocates for laws that limit registry access strictly to law enforcement agencies, laws that terminate registry requirements once a registrant has completed his or her court-imposed sentence, laws that remove retroactive increases in the length of registration or in new restrictions, laws that target harmful acts, not whole classes of people, and which rehabilitate rather than punish and shame. Add laws that require, and this one's a mouthful, laws that require post-prison civil commitment to be judicially imposed with a robust adversarial process, in which the burden is on the state to prove that a person presents an imminent danger to the public. Laws that provide equal justice for all, where people accused of a crime are presumed innocent until they're proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and where punishments can reasonably fit the crime. And finally, we advocate for educational programs that will be effective at reducing sexual abuse, both before and after a conviction occurs. From time to time, especially as I traverse the halls of our state's legislature, people will ask me, "So, what do you advocate for?" And I tell them that I advocate for the most unpopular cause in the United States. Now, that usually gets a laugh. Then I tell them I fight for reforming sex offense laws. "Oh," they say, "yeah, that would be really unpopular." Interestingly, though, most of them do go on to say, "Yeah, that really needs to be done. I really, I'm glad to see somebody doing that." Advocacy for any cause can be grueling, and it can also be very lonely. And that brings me finally to, in some ways, I think, the most valuable aspect of this conference. This year, just as in every past year, we meet and mingle with other activists and professionals who recognize that America's sexual offense laws have gone too far and have gone in the wrong direction. We'll draw strength from each other as we learn better ways to fight this most unpopular cause. And those of us who are leaders in this movement, we become like extended family. We share each other's frustrations and pain, our joys and our victories. Sometimes we disagree, and we may not always even like each other. But darn it, we are still family. And families stick together. I look forward eagerly to renewing and strengthening those bonds this year with those of you I know, and to adding many new members to my extended family this year. Thank you.
So, again, as Brenda stated, in the last few years, our movement has moved toward a more common vision, a united mission. And I'll give you some examples. We in the very beginning, obviously we're still really in the beginning, but there was a lot of different, people were just not really sure what direction, was the direction we needed to go. And that message is really getting clearer and clearer. But more concerningly in the beginning, we had people wanting to go in very drastically different directions. Well, my son looked at pictures, and so I'm only worried about my son that looked at pictures. Or my victim was just slightly underage, so I'm just worried about those group of people. And I think we've united to realize that this movement is about helping everyone that is willing to be helped. All the folks that have fallen and made mistakes in their lives and are ready to move on, become good, upstanding, and productive citizens. And as we all know, the research shows that 90 to 97% of those that have fallen, that have made mistakes, will move on and become good, productive citizens. I'll be the first to say it, no one has all the answers yet. How do we get to where we're going? How do we deal with the media? How do we get things calmed down at the federal level so that states aren't under so much pressure? But that's part of what we're here to do, is to come up with ideas and start to come up with those answers. But at our core beliefs are that these laws are unconstitutional, regardless of what the courts have found, which has been a mixed bag, and there are reasons for that, which we won't go into now. These laws are unconstitutional. And even just the very premise of updating somebody's registration information, make them go to a police station every 90 days for the rest of their life without any due process, without a court sentence, is unconstitutional. But also the morality of it. It is immoral to torture registered families for the rest of their lives. Also at our core beliefs is the understanding of all the research in the last 10, particularly 5 to 7 years. And this is the really important thing when we're talking to the media and we're talking to other folks outside our circle. Fine, you want to seek out vengeance against registrants and even their families. But these laws have been proven to endanger us all. And if you're not familiar with all the recent research, I encourage you to look at all the recent research so you can effectively advocate. But there are many ways in which these laws endanger our lives. Our voices must be unified. That is key. Unity within the movement is just as critical as the civil rights struggle for African Americans. And I actually forgot, but I was going to bring up a timeline that's about 20 feet long that I got off Wikipedia. That is the African American civil rights movement timeline. Guys, it ain't going to happen overnight. We're making great progress, but we're in this for the long haul. Of course, that doesn't mean we don't have differences of opinion related to sexual violence prevention and how to accomplish those goals. And that is something that we've really got to really talk about. We've also got to not only say the registry is wrong, but what is the answer? How do we prevent sexual violence? What are those effective methods of doing that? And we need to listen to the experts. We need to even talk to the victims groups that are out there, the good ones that advocate. And by the way, all the victims groups in New Mexico are on our internal mailing list and get every mail we get, just to give you an idea. So it's really important to find out what the solutions are. If the registry isn't it, how about treatment in prison before you're released, as an example? You're going to hear that from a lawmaker this weekend. So those are the kind of things that we also have to look at. There will be a spirited debate, regarding strategy that's going to be ongoing, just as with Dr. Martin Luther King. Sometimes those members of that movement also disagreed with him and other civil rights leaders. But Dr. King insists on nonviolence and peaceful disobedience, and others took a more aggressive approach. And we obviously have to be cognizant of the balance between that and make sure we're always on the right side of what we do. That's very important. The other side can attack us. They can put out lies there about high recidivism or whatever they want to do, but we need to always be on the right side of things. Our movement has made enormous strides in achieving the unity of purpose, but we're not quite there yet. This movement will continue to undergo a transformation just as our label for registered people has changed. And those that have been to all the conferences will know we started something the first conference, we called each other sex offenders. Then when we said, God, let's tone that down. Let's go registered sex offender. Then I think I remembered ex-sex offender. Anybody remember that? Then registered sex offender, then registrant was kind of a more modern one. And then one that I've started using, I think I've heard of a few other people, is registered family. 60% of our households, that of those folks that are on the registry, I know y'all aren't obviously, have minor children at home. The entire family is registered. That is the dirty little secret. And it shouldn't be a secret any longer. Our movement must hold leaders accountable for enactment of ill-conceived, unconstitutional, immoral laws, and just simply stated bad public policy. As we sit here today, most states are AWA compliant or working to become so. And those that have decided not to comply clearly will face mounting pressure to do so. I'm happy to announce today, New Mexico is not AWA compliant. We have fought them for 5 or 6 years on that, and we've had no new laws pass against us. But unfortunately, we're actually trying to become AWA compliant on purpose. Why? Because a dirty little secret for most of the registries across the country is they go far beyond AWA. In New Mexico, almost everyone registers for the remainder of their life now. A law that was passed just before we became involved, a year or two before we became involved. So in reality, if we could get Adam Walsh Act here, the sad story is it would be better than what we have. And it's a very similar story for Texas, where they register almost everybody retroactively for life. It is really, so everybody gets hung up on AWA. But let's be clear, if we actually instituted AWA in New Mexico, we would have a net reduction in registry size. Now, of course, they're going to want to add new offenses and not take anybody off, so we're not going to let them do that. But if they were willing to do it responsibly to get their $20 a year in additional burn grant funds, we would, we would entertain that. Unfortunately, the other side has not been willing to do that. So anyways, just keep that in mind. We need to move beyond the AWA discussion. So, the road to reform will ultimately be paved with stronger state and national organizations, and that's where I think you're kind of seeing us go. More money to work with, which you're going to hear about a little bit from Larry, staffing and education. Guys, this cannot continue to be a keyboard movement. This cannot continue to be people hiding in dark corners with pseudonyms, affiliates that don't go to the legislature or don't talk to the media. That has got to change. And I hope you'll see that, what RSOL New Mexico did this year, and really to an extent the great footsteps we followed on for St. Louis last year, that the sky didn't fall by having our conference here. A matter of fact, we've done quite well. Our legal fund has grown by anonymous donations even. And we've brought in about 10 or 15 new members. So, yeah, so. Now, to achieve the goals that we want to accomplish, and significantly what you heard Brenda talk about, and really, guys, our mission, our values that we've now refined is really just, I think, so on target. To do that, we need to come up with solutions for lawmakers. How do we get there? How do we get there politically? How do we get there in a manner that is backed by research, data? How do we get there in a constitutional manner? How do we get this accomplished without costing, if it takes $50,000 for a process to remove somebody from the registry, we're probably not going to pass that into law. So we need to keep all these things in mind, and that's what we're going to do here. Now, we have to ask ourselves, again, who's going to come up with this alternative for lifetime sentences for all? The Department of Justice? The ACLU? No, it's going to be us. We have to start to talk about converting our efforts from holding the line against new punishment laws, which we still need to do, but also start to talk about how are we going to begin to pass legislative reform at the state level in our individual states, and how are we going to coordinate that. Again, another important difference about this conference, talking about how to move forward with changes. The entire country is counting on us, even if they don't know it yet. And rewriting these unjust laws is catching the dream of reform. According to the mission statement, we seek the most basic of criminal justice principles: no punishment or humiliation for registered families after a sentence is complete. This will likely need some sort of stepping stone to get there. I don't believe we're going to get to this point where tomorrow we introduce a bill that says everybody off probation and parole no longer on the registry. We need to figure out how we get there through legal action, through suggested legislative proposals, and that sort of thing. And that's what we're going to be doing here. We're going to, the experts, for which I am not one, are going to be getting together to talk about that and come up with some great ideas so that everybody, at least hopefully in some time in a reasonable near future, will have a way for their family to earn their way off the registry. We must develop that alternative. We're asking everybody participating in this conference to move from the defensive position a little bit and start moving toward the offensive position. We introduced 4 reform bills in New Mexico last year, and we got through with a couple of them, and one was vetoed by the governor, and we learned that the politics probably aren't there yet, but we also learned a lot, and we got well positioned, so when we have a new political structure, we'll be ready to go, and we need to see everybody start to move in that direction, all of the leaders certainly. So it's up to us to develop a solid, well-thought-out alternative to today's registry laws that we can sell to lawmakers that improves public safety. We heard the media going, oh my gosh, we're here to soften registry laws. Now, I know RSOL admin doesn't want me to say this, but I'd like to say we're going to strengthen them, because if we get all the people that have been on there since 1972 off, and at least reduce it to those that have recently committed a crime and are on probation or parole and show some sort of risk, maybe at least then if somebody looked at it, they would know there's who might be dangerous. So that is a position that we can take as we're selling our message now. We must come up with laws that do take care of public safety, but protect our families at the same time and preserve our Constitution, our moral values, and our criminal justice system. We must educate the public that the current system is not saving lives, but actually destroying lives, including those of innocent children and registrants. We're asking participants in the conference to apply their knowledge of law, current research, risk assessment, and more to create a working plan for legislative reform that accomplishes these goals over time with lawmakers in each state. Guys, we want to also encourage those that work together to work together after the conference. These 2 panels, the legal one and the therapy one, we'd like to see you get together by teleconference and by email and continue to work on things. This is going to take a couple of years to design a program. And so, guys, we want you to continue to work together over time. We want to come out of this not just have talked about something, but actually have plans of action. That's really important to me. 2 of our scheduled panel discussions are intended to get this plan off the ground. You'll look at your presentation. One, again, is focusing on the legal and procedural aspects. The other one is focused on therapy, sexual violence prevention, and those that know something about risk assessment. So Barbara McClama will moderate the therapy research risk assessment one. Larry Neely will moderate the legal one, and they will come back, and you'll see that scheduled in your brochure there, and they will come back together again to talk about what kind of ideas they came up with and what their plan of action moving forward might be. That will occur on Sunday. I encourage all of you attending to network and discuss these ideas outside the workshops as well. God, I heard this, but that was cockamamie. If they do that, that's going to, let's all, let's not make this exclusive to those to actually having the workshop themselves or those actually on the panel. Let's all get involved in the discussion. It's very important. I'm proud of everyone who has made it here and making the commitment to lead. You are leaders. You are civil rights leaders in a new civil rights movement. That is incredible. And in advance, I'd like to thank everyone for their hard work in creating a better future for everyone. I'd like to now introduce Larry Neely. He's going to give you some more thoughts on where we're headed and how we need to get there. He is on the board of RSOL New Mexico. He serves as our legislative legal coordinator and our treasurer. There's probably 4 or 5 more hats, too. I'm not sure what they are right now. But Larry will speak to the issue of how we transition from a dream of reform to achieving actual reform after we leave this conference. So please give him a warm welcome.
So as we move forward with what Lloyd and Brenda have presented, and we think about how do we transition from the dream of reform to actual reform. And as you look around this room here, there's a lot of dedicated individuals here, and we're grateful, as Brenda said, for every one of them, but there's too few here. And there's a lot of registrants out there on the list, and we hear numbers between 500,000, 700,000. Don't really know the accurate number because a lot of people are on multiple registries if they live in one state and work in another, if they've ever moved from one state. But conservatively, it's at least 500,000 and their families. And these families are adversely affected as well. I work in the legal business and in a law office, and we hear from families where their children are bullied, harassed. They're kicked off athletic teams or cheerleading squads, or when they were normal families until all of a sudden they were on this list. And certainly we didn't intend, even the most vindictive people didn't intend for the families and the minor children to suffer this abuse from this horrible list. So this conference workshops will help us better understand. There'll be workshops that will talk about the legislative process. There'll be workshops that will talk about what our legal options might be. But one thing that is crystal clear is that these laws that are so beyond what their original intent were, they came to be because we weren't at the table. We were not at the table at all. And we weren't barred from being at the table. We just didn't show up at the table because we were hoping it would just go away. And that we thought if they get enough of flesh, if they get enough restrictions, they'll stop. Well, let me let you in a little secret. They won't stop because there will always be plenty of creative politicians who will be grandstanders looking for a way to show that they're tough and that they're creative. So, for example, in Alabama, they've recently passed a law that you have to have a travel permit if you've completed all your prison sentences, you've completed your debt to society, you're just on the registry list, but you have to have a travel permit to leave the state of Alabama. And so they will never run out of creative things to do to think of new ideas. And let me just give you a little background on New Mexico. In 1995, we created our first registration requirements with just 5 offenses on the list. And it was only going to be for people who were convicted of those serious offenses. And within 10 years, the list has almost tripled. Again, we weren't at the table. And the last time there was any major additions to the changes to the registry was in 2005, and we still were not at the table. But in the year 2000, they went back and made it retroactive to anyone who was in prison or on probation or parole as of July 1st, 1995, where they had originally said that it was only for people who were convicted after July 1st, 1995. But we weren't watching, and they made it retroactive. And then in 2005, they got more creative. They required every 90 days rather than once a year. And then they required it be lifetime. So the creativity will never end. So if we want to change, we have to participate. And the game changed dramatically in 2006 when Congress passed the Adam Walsh Act. Prior to the Adam Walsh Act, a number of states used individualized risk assessments in terms of how they would deal with who would be displayed to the public. And since the Adam Walsh Act came into being, it's purely based on offense committed. And regardless of what the offense is, if you're registered, with exception of misdemeanor offenses, the Adam Walsh Act requires that the person be on the public website. As more and more states have announced amended their respective laws, the Adam Walsh Act sought to create some sort of consistency because the states have started competing with one another, wanting to be tougher. Certainly don't want those sex offenders coming to our states. So as Lloyd mentioned, there'll be workshops that will focus on what our role should be. And when I say our role, I mean national RSOL, the affiliates, and the families. What our role should be in shaping this reform effort. Certainly the need for an alternative approach is evident and clear. The question is, how do we go about it? Well, one option would be for us to try to individually approach each legislature and work in the legislative process in all the states. And that is very expensive because we don't have enough people, enough expertise to be in all 50 states at one time. And some people think there are 57 states, but just for all 50 states. So we don't have the resources to do that. And beyond that, state legislators fear that if they make changes to their registration requirements, and well, if we are perceived as being soft, we'll become a haven. So even those states who recognize they've gone too far, they find it difficult to pull back because there's the fear that the word will get out and then they'll all be coming here. So then what do we do? Who do we work with? Well, a second option might be working with RSOL, working with a group, say, like the Uniform Law Commission. And the Uniform Law Commission, most of you, except for the attorneys in the room, probably have never heard of the Uniform Law Commission. But they've been around for at least 100 years. And they're the oldest state governmental association, and they've been the source of more than 300 uniform acts that are adopted by the various states where uniformity is desirable. In fact, they just approved at their most recent session the Uniform Mobile Home Act, where mobile homes can be used as collateral as real property rather than personal property like titles, like a car title. So those who own mobile homes for the states who adopt the Uniform Mobile Home Act, which I forget the title, they will be able to use their mobile home that's on a permanent structure, a piece of property, and the states will begin to ratify and adopt the Uniform Mobile Home Act, and that is a good example of the Uniform Law Commission at work. I believe the Uniform Law Commission is uniquely positioned to help our cause. Uniform SORNA guidelines would relieve states from the burden of drafting state-specific statutes with only a few optional provisions that would need to be individualized and tailored for that state. A uniform SORNA could establish a more consistent interstate movement for those who want to move from one state to the other. And the Uniform Law Commission has the resources if they would choose to undertake this project, and they could work with all the stakeholders using the available research to devise an improved and cost-effective regulatory scheme. And this is supposed to be a civil regulatory scheme that stays within constitutional constraints. Best of all, a uniform SORNA, if such a dream were to become a reality, would allow your state elected officials political cover that they need, because they could say, when the phone rings and someone says, well, how come? How come? They can say, well, we've adopted the uniform SORNA. It's the same in Alabama. It's the same in Alaska. It's the same in California. So we have a consistent law, and then all that pressure of competition is ending. It would end. So that would be the advantage. The disadvantage would be that there would be some states, there's a few states out there where the laws are not so heinous yet, and probably that uniform model would require those states like Vermont that have a 10-year registry requirement might end up with a longer requirement. But since the bulk of the states have a lifetime requirement these days, the overall net effect would be that the majority of the hundreds of thousands of families would benefit. So that's one idea of how we could move this towards a matter of fact, I work with an attorney who serves on that Uniform Law Commission as one of New Mexico's commissioners. So that's just one idea. But regardless of whether we're going to try to tackle it through all the state legislatures, or if we're going to try to tackle it through working with something like the Uniform Law Commission, as Brenda pointed out, we're going to need a recurring source of revenue. We're fortunate to have all these great state organizers and volunteers who put many hours in this effort, but their efforts alone are not sufficient. If we want a continuous presence at the table, so to speak, at our various state capitals, we will need financial resources that are currently lacking. We need qualified people to review proposed legislation and provide written analysis of those bills. We need people who can draft our own bills as well, and people that can stay in their state capitals and help shepherd these bills through the legislative process. This type of experience is seldom available on a pro bono basis at the level and consistency that we would need. And as we get into litigation, we're going to need experts to help us. Matter of fact, we litigated a case here in New Mexico, I think it was about a year ago, on the question of retroactivity and whether New Mexico's registration scheme had been sufficiently transformed into punishment. We needed an expert to testify, and the public defender was doing the case, and we didn't have the financial resources for the expert. So we used a social worker, and she did her best, but her best was not very good. And we lost that case, and we chose, based on the not having properly set for appeal, we decided that we would wait for a better case that was developed to appeal that issue of whether New Mexico's sex offender registration as it stands today has transformed from a civil regulatory scheme to punishment. But we will need a recurring source of revenue at both the national and the state level. Most advocates have realized that there are very few philanthropic organizations that are anxious to help us, and I think that's an understatement. So, and even if that were a viable option, RSOL would need to be able to demonstrate that we are a viable operation, that we are serious about this cause, and that's going to require a base income of some type. And we think about that. There's whether that number is 500,000 or 700,000, it's somewhere in that range. And state governments fund their entire operations with that number of people. There are states in this union that have 500,000, 600,000 population. And that number of people provides governmental services across a broad spectrum of what state governments do. But for some reason, with 500 to 700,000 people, we don't think that we can do this ourselves. And we keep waiting for someone to come and save us. And that person or that group or that entity is not out there. We are going to save ourselves. And most of the resources are going to come from the registrants and their families, unfortunately. And it's not going to be that hard of a task. If there are truly 500,000 people, conservatively, and you've got 10% of those, which is not an overly optimistic goal, and they paid $20 a year, what is 20 times 50,000 on a recurring basis? So you're talking about a revenue stream on a recurring basis that would be more than adequate for the goals that Brenda, our executive director, laid out. Now here in New Mexico, where we have a small registrant population of 3,000, that $20 model would not be as effective, and thankfully we have some givers, and we have some very generous givers, and I saw one walk in the door today, and I just want to say that that model is not as viable on our state level. So our membership dues for RSOL New Mexico are $60 a year and $50 a year if it's paid all in advance. I know that having 10% of the people as members of RSOL sounds like a lofty goal, but I think it's a reasonable goal, and I think that we can do it over the next 3 years. I believe if we begin now that we can move this cause to the next level, which is from the dream to action, and we can really make a difference. And I want to thank all of you for attending and for the work that you do, and I look forward to seeing you all in the workshops that will follow.